Hello, I am Brandon Smith, and I'm going over um, the basically I'm going over the vineyards of the New Testament, in which the vineyards were planted, and then depending on how the vineyard was depicted, there was people either taking care of it, and people approached it, and the situations unfolded as they did. So I look at all the cases in which vineyards are referenced, and in the New Testament is directed under Matthew 20. There's a passage under Matthew 20. There's a passage under Matthew 21, as you see, and there's also another passage under Mark 12. So I'm going to give you. He uses these passages to understanding that there's a connection to them. And to me, I always thought that, in the gist of what this says right here, is that in his story, he always has this. When I always read it and always thought it was like, you know, Jesus creates the kingdom of the vineyards and the land of the vineyards. So I always thought like Jesus is, the Lord's land is the vineyard, and no matter what, the Lord owns the vineyard, and everything in it is His. So I always think that that's the way it always is. And then in most of these stories, these parables, when it gets to the end, and they question and ask, well, they usually send the most honored person, which is the owner of the land, which is supposedly the Messiah. Everybody depicts as the Messiah, and that which, when he goes to get the land and says that he be the utmost, with he be the one that will be the most upright, most respectable, then at that time they say we'll kill him and will become the heirs of his land, and at any point in time they will own everything in the vineyard. And then the second few parables break down and say, well, what's going to happen to us then if we do such a thing? And then you'll question and wonder a little more, and it'll say, well, of course, the owner of the vineyard is going to retaliate. He's going to come and kill us then. And then you're going to see so forth and so forth. And I got bothered by how, when we get to this other section, all or most of this is centered around Jesus' last question. He says, what will the vineyard owner do? And he says, the stone in which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. He puts at the end of each one of these, and such, he says to them, have you not read the scriptures? The stone has become the rejected, and has become the cornerstone. Matthew 21, Matthew 20. And once again, what does it say? He says it a little differently this time. Just so as the last will become the first. So, where or what is my understanding of this? To me, to me, it's always is in any case that the the stories the stories okay, they each have their place. As when I've put together my commentary, the parable of the tenants, it has this place here, and which is in connection to the readings in this particular situation. And in Matthew, there's a reason why he gives this parable at the time he does for this particular situation. The parable of the two sons and the parable of the tenants. These stories all tribe together, just as in this one. He says, even here, is pertaining to a situation that happens on the pathway of his preaching. I don't. This is going to be a long segment, so you'll need some time to really look at this and dive into it some more. But I always look at it as that the vineyard is there. There is the owner of the vineyard, which is always a man, which plants the vineyard. The man planted the vineyard, and he goes off and leaves. He lets others take place of and use that vineyard. Now, the thing is that he always comes back and wants something from it. And he usually wants the fruit of what's in there. And the people that are over the vineyard don't usually want to give up the fruit. And yet, at the end, you see the rest of the story, which you have to understand and explain. I always think of it as the church is the vineyard and is producing the fruit, and Jesus, the Lord sends Jesus in the end, which is the heir. We always connect the heir of the Son to his taking of the fruit, which is to come and happen. And we present, and many doctrines will probably tell you that that is the situation. How it happens is that he sends his son to become the king scribe, and then what are they going to do? They're going to kill him. And you see in Matthew over here, he says, well, he says, I think that it says when the chief and the priest scribe heard this Jesus parable, they knew they was talking about them, and he thinks there's something. They think that there's something that spoke against them. He says, well, you must be talking about us. You must be thinking about this or that. So it's always in reference to thinking that he's always saying that, what it is. And it could, and in most ways, line up the way it is. But I want to bring in a situation and then tie them all together. So I always thought of it as that. And to me, I always thought of it as the father's the kingdom owner, the heir is the son. He's supposed to take his ownership of the land, and then when he takes his ownership of the land, they kill him, and they say they take everything that is theirs thereafter, which is heir to them. And at that point in time, what's going to happen? The wrath is to be put back onto them, and they will all die. But I always understand is that what they'll do is replace that which they kill with another to take care of the vineyard to get what they want out of it. So, the process is then which he then asks the last segment, the last part and he always says that which has become rejected is become the cornerstone, and that which the cornerstone is that. And I could not to understand how people, when they read that, they miss, to me, the concept of the whole situation. So I look back and say I have to bring in the parable of the lost son, in which when we read the lost son and we build all off of that, we can see how it goes. And that's where I get the parable of the lost son, because we think of the parable of the lost son, and then we say, well, we can connect that a lot better to it that way, in which how it is. But when you get to the end story, the story changes by Jesus, even by his own account, that says you're not seeing the whole picture here. You're not seeing it right. And if you look at my dictation of what the Alpha Omega is, Jesus was sort of the opposite of us. He said he was pure in form, and so he's pure. He's pure good, and so when we're pure bad, it appears the opposite of what it is. So, which it becomes a little different on how you understand when you see it. Okay, so let's get into this. I've done way too much time trying to explain it, but I set up my story. This is probably going to be a little while, because we're going to go through the Luke, the parable of the lost son. We're going to go through Mark 12, Mark 21, Mark 20, and then close it out, tying the understanding of how all these bring in together. Okay, so first we have the parable of the lost son. I'll read it, and I'm just going to go over these real quick. I'm not going to get into grammar. There might be a couple words in or out of place, but if there's a catch in there, well, I'll point it out to why it is the way it is. So, on Luke 15, 11 through 32, the parable of the lost son states this, in which is the setup of the understanding that says the son, God says, here's the son. He honors his son as being the heir to what it is. But you see, there's a split off here. And he says he's got two sons. Well, he's got two sons. He says he's got the good son and the son that does the other thing, which can be included into some other things as well. Okay, so Jesus, he continued, okay, the parable of the lost son. It says Luke 15:11. It says Jesus continued, and there was a man who had two sons. He said the younger one said to the father, "Father, give me my share of my estate." So he divided his property between them. So at this point in time, the father has the estate, and he says the man gives his son, both sons at the same time, their share of the estate of what is each one equally right. It may be that he gave all of what he owned to his two sons, or he could have gave just what he felt that it was a part of theirs to do what they wanted to. So he says not long after that, Luke 15:13. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. You see, almost all these other ones, they say his son left and went off to a distant country, and so you kind of might perceive that the vine dresser, he set his land where it was, and then he went and did something else, and then he needed something back from what he got. So after he had spent everything, there was a famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself. He went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country. So he sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed for his stomach he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. He was hungry, and no one gave him anything. He was empty inside, and he seen what was happening, and that's the way it was. So when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against the heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. Okay, he says, I'm going to tell my dad this when I see him, and when I get to my dad, I'm going to tell him this that that I said, because this is what I set out to do. He says, at this point in time, I'm no longer good enough to be doing what I'm doing, and he says I need to change, and that my father can help me better off than what I am, and I can eat. He says so. He says I'm willing to accept the change that I need to do. He says so. Here he says, but while I was still a long way off in saying most likely en route to um he says he got up and he went to his father. He said he I don't think he had a telephone call with his father and talked about it beforehand, but I think he just decided that this is what he's going to do. And then, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms up around him, and kissed him. You know, his father, seeing that he returned home, and knew that he returned home, and he says unto his father, he says, the son had said to him, Father, the son had said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring forth a fatted cow and kill it, and let us have a feast to celebrate. For this is mine son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found. So they begin to celebrate. Okay, so everything is being done for the sinner person. Everything's being done for the sinner person. And you know, and then everything's looked over, and there's a whole party, and there's all the attention was drawn off onto all the attention was drawn off onto the sinner, the sinner, the one that which sinned. All the attention was drawn off onto the sinner, but yet, all in the meantime, you have the one that is the other son, and he says the older brother become angry and refused to go in. He said, as his father went out and pleaded with him. No, wait, let me back up. I missed a step here. It says, meanwhile, the oldest son was in the field. He's working his land. He's doing what he needed to do the work to the land. It says, when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. And so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. And then they say, your brother, hallelujah, he's come back. He replied, and your father, and he replied, and your father had killed a fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Okay, the brother become angry and refused to go in, so his father went out. Okay, he's like, I'm not talking to you, Dad, and so his father went out and said, plead with him. He's like, hey, look, but he answered his father, says, look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and never disobeyed your orders. So you never gave me one, even not even a young goat, and so I could celebrate with my friends. He says, but when this son of yours has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. He does not understand what it is that's going. He says, I've done everything I need to do. And he says, and then, he says, and then you go and you put your focus on that, and in which I've done everything which is right. He says, my son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because the brother of yours was dead and is alive again, but he was lost and is found. We all know the parable which this is, that he which lost is found, that you turn away from God, that you're a sinner, and you come back to God is the righteous one, and you bow down before him, and you give your life over to him, and then you expect to see, your struggles and your hardships and your things like that. So I take into account that I look at it the same way as a little bit of the vine dressers, the people that are working into the fields of the vineyards. And he says, in the same sense, he says, is such as this. This is at this point in time. Let's look at it in Luke 15:11-32. You have the two sons. He says, okay, in the separate son onto the left side, he says, this is the man that went off to squander his wealth with his prostitutes and other things like that. And he says, we'll see. He says, and this man, he says, we'll just kind of think of it in along the lines of this. He says, a man planted a vineyard. Okay, he uses his land, he plants his vineyard, and I don't want to go there yet. That way. Okay, so a man planted a vineyard, and he put a wall around it. Okay, in this particular one, okay, there's one of these which he just he has, like, I don't know, he didn't in one he just planted the vineyard, and he didn't have a wall around it as such as this one. But okay, in this one, he says a certain man planted a vineyard. He set a hedge about it, and he dug a place for wine fat, and he built a tower, and he lent it out to a husbandman, and he went off into a far country. So he left it unattended. He put the people in place to take care of it. And he says at the season, he says at the time in which the season was right. So in which in time he knew that there would be stuff on the plant to take. So that at the season he sent his husbandman a servant, that which might receive from the husbandman of the fruit of the vineyard. And then basically he sends at the time people back to his land, the people that are working, the slaves that are doing their diligent work. He texts to them and says, send unto them, the servant, to get what is mine off of the land. So they they caught the servant, and says unto them, it says, and they caught him and beat him and sent him away empty handed. The one which he sent, they said they caught him, they beat him, they sent him away empty handed. And then the owner sends back another one and says, and again he sent unto him another servant, and at him they cast stones and wounded him in the head and sent him away shamefully away empty handed too. It says, and then again he sent another, and they killed him and many others, beat some and killed some. Yet another, and that therefore he says, I'm going to send my son, because my well beloved son, he sent him also last unto them, saying that they will reverence my son. They will be proud that the owner has enough initiative to say that his great is being sent to them, and they'll reverence him. And he says, but when the husbandmen said amongst themselves, he says, this is the heir, come let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And they took him and they killed him and cast him out of the vineyard. What shall therefore the Lord of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the husbandmen and give the vineyard unto others. And yet, have ye not read the scripture? The stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing and is marvelous in our eyes. This is Mark 12. Okay? And so, he's telling this parable to the other people. And so at this point in time, he tells the parable to them, and he says, and they sought to lay a hand on him, but the people feared, for that they knew that they had spoken a parable against him, and then left him and went their way. So, and then this breaks off right here. This breaks off into something else. But under Mark 12, it tells that story. And Matthew 21, it tells a similar story as such, was the landowner who planted the vineyard. All these were people that planted vineyards, and they wanted to take what was on the vineyards. He says, and there was a landowner who planted a vineyard, and he dug a wall around it. This is the same story, okay? He put a wall around it. He dug a wine press, and he built it, and he built a watchtower. To see, this both starts out. There's another couple other parables where the man one time he plants a vineyard only, and then there's one time where he plants only a vineyard with a wall around it with a tower onto it, and then there's just a different one how it says. So basically, this is Mark telling the exact replica kind of the story here. So to me, this seems about redundantly the same, I imagine, but there's a little bit of difference to it. But he says in the parable of the tenants, he says 33. He says there's a different action that happens to him. The parable of the tenants, Matthew 21. The parable of the tenants, it says, listen to another parable. It says there was a landowner who planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it and dug a wine press to it and built a tower. And he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. Okay, so he let the farmers do as they will, and then he went off to another place. And when the harvest time approaches, he sends the servants and attendants to collect his fruit, which to me don't seem right, because he rented the land off to the farmers, but there was a contract there that said that they can get the fruit off of there after he rented it to them. I don't know. Kind of a little interesting there. He says, but the tenants seized the servants. They beat one, they killed another one, and stoned a third. This is pretty much the same story. And then he sent off his servants to them. Then the first time, the tenants treated them the same way. The last one, he sent his son to them. Basically, that he'll be exalted. He'll be the one with the most respect, and they'll listen to him, and they'll do what he wanted to. But the tenants saw the son, and they said to each other, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and take his inheritance." And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard, and then they killed him. They didn't do it in the vineyard. So therefore, the owner of the vineyard comes. It says, therefore, when the owner comes, what will he do to these tenants? And he says, he will see. And then you see, in Mark, he tells them the story, and everybody walks away. So it's like there's a break in the story. He's like, you go and see somebody, and he says, and they tell you the same story every time you talk to them, and then they get back into the same story. And you're like, every time you visit these people, it's like, yeah, you heard the story, and he said, you heard the story, and you heard the story. And you're like, yeah, I know how it's going to end. Well, at the end of the story, it is like this. He says, and then he says, this is the heir. He says, we'll kill him. We'll take what's ours. And he says, and what will the vineyard What will the owner of the vineyard do? He says, "We'll come and kill the tenants and give the vineyards to others." He says, "Haven't you read this? This is the scripture that says this." And the priest chiefs, the teachers of the law, elders looked away to arrest him because he knew that they spoke a parable against him, but they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away. Now, in this one, in this particular situation, they're like, well, um, you know, this is the same situation. So, okay, so those two are the same. So what's different with the third one? Okay, so these two parables are pretty much the same. These two being pretty much the same, but yet we're gonna go with Jesus changed his story, and it says the parables of the workers in the vineyard. So here's Matthew's account in another situation, the same thing at the same time. It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers in the vineyard. He agreed to pay the denarius." See, that's not even the same one. So you have to understand that. I have to pause this. Okay, so I was missing one, and for some reason the Bible Gateway didn't catch it. But I pulled up this one. This one's the one that explains things a little differently. It says, in the two versions of Mark here, and in the Mark 12 and the Mark Matthew 21 and 20, he puts the vineyard in place, and then he puts the trench and the walls in place, and the place for he put the flow of the vine, the grapes get mashed and the juices are run and flow as they're supposed to go. This is a man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it to protect it so people couldn't get in. He dug a pit for the wine press so that which when you press the wine, it can go where it needs to. And he said he built a watchtower for those to look over top of the lands, and also most likely a place, because if you change it to the new King James Version, he says he built a place for them, which is a building which they can rest their head. So he says they can live on and manage and use what they need to of the land and do what they need to of the land for that period of time. He says, which I was trying to say is that what makes this other parable so much different, and he says, on the parable of the Luke 20, and which I gave commentary on this other one as well, he says, I planted a vineyard, and I rented it out to some farmers, and went away for a long time. He didn't say he put anything on it for the people that were on the land. He didn't say that they give them right to live on the land, and to take from the land is to live from it, and to protect it. He says they basically he planted a vineyard and rented it to some farmers to farm, basically as they are farmers, and to farm and do the process of farming, not watching out over it. And he said he went away for a long time. And it says in Luke 20:10, he says at harvest time he sent a servant to the tenants so that they could give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him some away empty-handed. He sent a servant to his tenants to get some food from the vineyard, but the tenants beat that servant and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, but that one was also beat and treated shamefully and sent away empty-handed. He sent a third, and, well, they wounded him and threw him out. And then the owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? I shall send my son, whom I love, perhaps, and they will respect. Same situation here. But when the tenants saw him, they talked the matter. When the tenants saw him, they talked the matter over. So they conspired and said, "This is the heir." They said, "Let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out in the vineyard and killed him. And what then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and kill it. And then so they threw him out and they killed him. And most likely in Jesus' is probably red print. If you're reading it from the Bible, it says It says, and then, so the people he's talking to most likely question him and say, and then what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? And he said, come to kill the tenants and give the vineyard to others. And when the people heard this, they said, God forbid. Jesus looked directly at them and asked, then what is the meaning of what is written? Then what is written? The stone which the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. Everyone that falls on the stone will be broken into pieces, and everyone whom falls will be crushed. And the teachers of the law and chiefs looked at a way to arrest him immediately, because he knew that they spoke a parable against him, and that they were afraid. But they were afraid of the people, and basically let him go, because you can't take somebody that they praise and take away and do bad things to. So it looks better if they think bad of them. Then it's not that bad. Then they can kill them at that point in time, because they'll have a negative image of them, and then therefore it won't dirty themselves in their eyes, because they look like they're the greater people already, because they're supposed to be the ones in the white robes and the heroes of the celestial world. So what is this all getting down to? The whole story was this: is that you always think that the imperative of what is happening here is that the landowner is his rights to the fruit, and the landowner wants to get his fruit, and so he has the right. So therefore, the landowner, since his son, which is the heir, which his heir got sons, he's got equal rights as even sending the guy himself as the owner, which the owner wasn't coward enough to go and do it himself. But they said, therefore, he goes and does it that way. Well, in all cases, and even the scribes themselves, Jesus looked directly at them and asked, he says, then what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone that the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on the stone will be broken into pieces, and everyone who falls will be crushed, in which it falls will be crushed. I did not understand that, so I'm going to try. I understand it, but I want you to understand it in the way in the light that I understand it. To do this, we have to look at the assumption of this, that the parable of the lost son, the son that goes off, squanders his life with prostitutes while he's away, he comes back to the land and is praised. When we look at that, we see that, the son is supposed to return. We look at the relevance of it, and we think that the son is supposed to return back to the land and get what is his. But it is not always so in that case, and why is it that way? And he says, do you not see the relevance of the tying of all three of these or four of these together? You see, you have the father, which is, this is, the man had two sons, and he says, he gives to him his first son his land. And so basically, the first son has his land, in which is the man. The man gives out his portion of the land to people to work it and to take care of it. And then he goes off into the far country and pills away and drinks and be gluttony and uses prostitutes and things like that. And he says, and then in which at the time, while he's away, you have, let's just say, the other son, which is this. He says, meanwhile, the other son was in the field. He spends his time working the land. He's the worker of the land. He's the tenant of the land. And it says, and when you come near, you come, and it says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. He came near the house, and he heard the music and dancing. So he called to one of the servants and asked him what was going on. It says, our brother has come, he replied, and our father was killed fattened calf, and he has him, because he has him back home safe and sound. So, to which you want to understand where you hang your millstone, we look at the pinnacle of the whole story, and that the stone in which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and is marvelous in our eyes. What does that mean? In context, without getting into the actual parable, which I will later, the Psalms section of where that come from, you see, the footnote is the parable comes from footnote 1:8, and it does not have it. There it is, right there. It says Psalm 118. So you look at Psalm 118 and you read that entire psalm and try to connect what is going on there with what is all happening, and you'll come up with the situation which is going to build even deeper on top of what this is to be the whole story to close it all together. You see, so he asks you the question, and he tells you, he says the cornerstone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone in which, whatever. So here you have basically two things. You have the son that set the land there to be worked and be done onto. And he says, and then you got the son that worked the land and did the stuff to the land. And at any point in time, you become to think that the tenants. And you look at the tenants. I look at the tenants as the son that stayed on the land to work it, and the tenant, the son that worked on the land, and the people that is the foreigner, which is the heir to the land. Another heir to the land comes, and they think that the heir of the land, which is his son, he comes, and then what happens to what do you think? What do you think that they? What do you think that you see? What do you think that's going to happen? You think they're going to take and say, okay, yeah. So what's happening here? He says, quick, bring me the best robe to him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring me a fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this is my son who's dead and alive, and now he was lost and found. So let the party begin. Woohoo! Okay, so when you see these tenants, you ask yourselves when these tenants are conjuring together, and they're like, well, what do we do? We got two choices here. You do the heavenly thing. Let's do the godly thing, and let's have a party and say he has sent his son, his beloved one, to us. So let's have a party, have a fattened calf. We'll pick we'll pick all of the fruits off the trees. It's time for harvest, and then we'll just hand it over to him and say, "Here you go, son. There it is." And then you go take it back to your father, and there it is. And they can have it, and then we can continue to repeat the same process over and over, because guess what? This season's going to end, and another season's going to come, and we're going to do this, and we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to keep doing this, because apparently that's the way it is. If you don't send another servant, there's going to be another servant, there's going to be another servant. He says, so let's just kill everything that has anything to do with it, and let's just take the ownership of the inheritance to what is ours is to what is ours. And so you question now and wonder, well, where's this reasoning with what the son has for the one that's working the fields? What is the understanding to what it is that they are doing? He says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. He came in here at the house, and he heard the music and the dancing. He called him to the servants, and he asked him, what is going on? He says, I don't understand what's going on. He says, the brother has come. He replied, and the father has killed the fattened calf. And he said unto him, he said, he come because he came back safe. And he says, the older brother was angry, and he refused to go in. He said, no, hell. He says, no, He says, I am mad. I ain't going into this party. He says, I don't want nothing to do with you. And there's probably some words exchanged. And then his father went out. He said, pleaded with him. He said, my son, come back, come back. Why do you leave? Why do you forsake me? This is the way it's supposed to be. And he answered to his father. He says, look, for all these years I've slaved for you. I've done everything for you. I've never disobeyed your orders. He says, and you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. He says, but then the son of yours, so when the son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. Why do you do so? And the son, and it says, my son, the father, he says, my son, the father said, who allows with me and everything I have is yours. But I had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours is dead and alive, but was lost and is found. The tenants that were living on the land were mad. They were the brother. They were the ones that said, no. He says, you just can't, if you leave. In each case, Mark says, these people had a place to lay their head. They was given, they were slave plantationers. He says they were given a wall around it. There's a pit dug across it. There's a functionality of how to weave the cotton. There's cotton gin mills and everything else like that. There's a little watchtower, look over things to protect the land. He says that's what they had to do day and night. They labored, and then they paid rent for it. They paid their taxes to do what they had to do into the vineyard for the farm. They were farmers. And then the owner isn't even there to look over it. He says that there's their responsibility to look over and take care of that situation and that thing. And he says, and then you want to send someone else to take this away from us? You want to take all that away? But what does Jesus say in the end? He says, I see your predicament. But what do you see in the end? He says, you can kill the heir. Everybody says, let's kill the heir and the inheritance will be ours. But here's the problem. He says they see that the Messiah, I believe, that what they do is they relate the parable of Luke to the fact that, the son is returning to take what is his and reclaim what is his and say he is wrong, and he's supposed to be reverenced as being the one, to be the one thankful for the coming and returning, and that he'd be looked at as the owner returning back to the thing. And that's how they look at it themselves. He says, to dive deeper into this and to get to the actual stripping it away line by line and putting it together back the way it should be, he says, but the tenants said to one another, this is the heir, come let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. That is repeated across all 3 or 4 passages, we'll all agree. He says, and so they took him and they killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. He says, and then the question is what happens now? What happens after we take what it is ours that we're working so hardly for? It says, and then what will the owner do to us in retaliation for what we have done? He will come and kill the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read this passage in the scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and the Lord has done this. and is marvelous in our eyes. And the chief priests and the teachers and the law elders looked upon a way to arrest him because they knew that he spoke a parable against him. Okay, this is where it gets into the nitty ditty details on which you got to strip it apart. Jesus tells the story of the parable, how it is. And that's basically the parable of the tenants. That's this section here. And when he gets down to the end, there's a question of what's the moral of the story, wrap it up, close it up so we can understand. And they drive down to this, they assume, both people look at each other and assume that we compare ourselves either to that or not. They say, what's going to happen to the vineyard? What's going to happen to us? And they think that he will come and kill the tenants and take the vineyard and give it to others, because that will be the rightful situation. But the problem is this, when we look at it, that the chief priests say that we are already deciding on the fact that we're the vineyard owners. We're already deciding on the fact that somebody's going to come and kill us and take it. Somebody's already deciding on the fact that, we're going to have to kill this man. They want to arrest him because he spoke a parable against them. And they were afraid that that's what he meant. In Mark 12. He says in Mark 12, he says this. And it leaves open. This one, you see, it says, and then what happens to the owner of the vineyard? And he says he'll come and kill the tenants in the vineyard. And then the chief priests see it this way. And so they left him and they walked away. He told him the story once. Okay? He told him the story once. And that's Mark's recollection of it. Then you got Luke's recollection of it. And you got Matthew's recollection of it. Guess what? Matthew's recollection of it. Okay, look. Luke's recollection of how it went down was as so. He says, and then the owner of the vineyard do to them. He said, come and kill the tenants and give the vineyards to others. And the people heard this, and they said, God forbid. Jesus said directly unto them, and he asked, what's the meaning of this? For it was written, the stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone falls on the stone, will be broken to pieces, and everyone who falls upon them will be crushed. Did you get this? He says the teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for a way to arrest him immediately, because they knew they had spoken a parable against him, but they were afraid of the people. They couldn't stop what he did. Okay, so the story was told one time here. They looked to do what they needed to do. Luke, it was said again, or it was the same story. Which one is it? Matthew is said again, or it's the same story. So, therefore, we get another addition to the end, but this time with a little different twist. Because in the first storytelling, they say they look for a way to arrest him. Okay, and if I got my readings right, which I think I do, that same thing which happens again. It says, and therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what do you want to do with the tenants? What will he do with those tenants? He'll bring those rich, and so this time they actually get a guess. He tells the story to them, and this time he leaves them interpretation for what's going to happen. There's a little more dialogue in between the two, and so he says the tenant sees the tenant sees the servants one by one. They beat him one by one. The third one they kill him. See, this is a different story. He gives it to him a different story, so this is a different way. He says the tenant sees his servants. They beat one, they killed another, and they stoned the third one. And then they sent other servants to him, more than the first time. See, the other one, there's one servant this first time. The second one, there's a second servant. Then the third time, he sends his son. Okay, and this time he sent several servants. He says they beat one, they beat another, they stoned the third. It says, then they sent other servants to them more than the first time, and then the tenants treated them the same way. And the last of all, then he sent the son to them, and then they said they will respect his son. Okay? Why the three stories the way it is? Each one of the three stories has one word or two or a situation changed, which makes it completely different. He says, but then the tenants saw that they seen each other, that they seen the heir. They said, let's kill him and take his inheritance. The moral of the story is this. And so they took the story, they said they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and they killed him. He said, therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do? He leaves it as a question. He leaves it open. He says, tell me what's going to happen. They didn't bounce down here and say, well, then what will the people of the vineyard do? He will kill the tenants and give the vineyards to others. Haven't you read this? See, this is a parable that says, he says, then will the owner of the vineyard do? What will the vineyard owner do? See the question? See the parable here? This right here? There's a quotation mark. This is all one speech. This is all one speech. And I'm probably pretty much sure without looking at my red dictionary Bible that is being said by somebody of the same statue. So it's either God saying this, or it's either Jesus saying this, or is somebody else saying this. I'm pretty much sure that, see, there's a dialogue here. And I believe Jesus began to speak to them in parables. But yet, he let little cuts in. He let a little cut in here. This is Mark. This is all one. This is all one speech. This is all one speech right here. Most likely all one speech, a little broken up. He says this spew. I look at these as monks. He says this spew. He says, and then they stick their hands in their robes. And the chief priests and the teachers of the law looked away the rest of them, and they walked away. Here in Luke, and he says, and then what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He says he will kill the tenants, give the vineyard to others. And the situation goes like this. And the people heard this and said, God forbid. Jesus looked directly at them and asked, then what is the meaning of that which is written? He asked them, what is the meaning of which was written? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Well, it continues the same thing. Everyone falls on the stone. And then that's for, again, the story dies. There's no reply back. The story dies. Jesus says the story. It ends. They look at the priest, look at it. They put their hands in their robes. They say they're powerless. They walk away. They don't want to do anything now. Whatever. Why, when you get to here, does this go a different way? He tells this story. They walk away. He says, then, therefore, we are so repeating ourselves here, but there has to be this engraved into you. He says, therefore, the owner of the vineyard comes. He says, what will you do to the tenants? And he says, he asked them, what's going to happen? And they're like, yeah, we heard this story before. Because apparently you come maybe a day before. You maybe come 2 days or 5 days before. And we already heard this. We already know this, Jesus. He says, he'll bring the wretches to the end. He will bring the wretches to the end. Wretches to a wretched end. They're like, he's going to kill them. And even then, if he didn't tell the story all these times before, And they just got to this whole conclusion, and he actually even told them, he says, they're going to come and kill you, basically. They're saying that they're accepting of knowing what Jesus is saying, and that they will bring it into the wretched end. They replied, and they said, therefore, this is one speech. So therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to these tenants? He will bring those wretches to a wretched end. And they replied back. They replied either this, or what you're going to have to say, or they replied that. And they will rent the vineyard to other tenants who will give his share of the crop of harvest at harvest time. So to me, this section here is what's most important, because they're asking him Jesus is asking them, do you know what's going to happen? And they're acceptive of saying that he will bring it into the riches at the end. And they replied, and he will rent the vineyard to other tenants who will give him his share of the crop at harvest time. Jesus said to them, have you read the scriptures? The stone in which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and the Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in his eyes. Okay, I've eaten that enough and engraved that in your brain, that therefore I tell you that the kingdom will be taken away from you and given to people which will produce fruit. Everyone who falls on the stone will be broken into pieces. Everyone whom it falls will be crushed. And therefore, yeah, you get the whole same sense right there. It says, then the chief priests heard Jesus' parables. They knew they was talking about him, and they looked for a way to arrest him. But they were afraid because the people were there. It's the exact same telling. Here, we have a situation that the problem with this whole thing is that Jesus, when he gets to the end, of this parable, they already tell him and ask him. They know they know what is going to happen. I've engraved this entire thing to you for one reason, and I've gone over this and over this and over this. Jesus tells them the parable, and he actually gives them the chance to speak back, and they get it right. They're like, he will bring his wretches to the wretched end. He will basically destroy them, which is wrong. They repeated, and he will rent the vineyard to their tenants, who will give him his share of the crop at harvest time. And Jesus, to me, you gotta remember, he's in Matthew 20, and this is his angry phase. So he's like, this whole, we're looking at, Jesus is a little pissed off here, just to say it the way it is. Jesus just walked into Jerusalem. He walked up on stage. He preached and healed the lame and poor. Walked out. In the meantime, he knocks over all of these things, the money peddlers and everything else. He rambles and shakes up the whole. He shakes up the the people as they are. He leaves. He sucks the life out of that entire church in his comparison to what the fig tree is. Jesus says Jesus curses a fig tree. Okay, the fig tree is a church, in which he just went into this church and strangled the life out of it because he did what was supposed to be done, and it was in his way. He was hungry, and he was not hungry. He does not say that his stomach was ground. It says in the morning that Jesus was on his way back to the city. He was hungry. You know, he was stressed out and angry and mad that night. He woke up and was hungry. There's two types of hungry. You'd be hungry to be after something and want something, and there could be the hungry for the food in your stomach. But you cross the path in which you come across a tree, in which the tree is supposed to be giving life, and which it looks like it's giving life, but there's no life there to produce the fruit. And you go back to the fact that he was looking for food, and he was looking for preaching, and he come to the temple. He come to the temple. He come to the village. He walks into the great temple, and what does he expect to see there? If there was a church there, he'd expect to come in and see prayer. He'd come in and expect to see life. He'd expect to see healing and the works of the Lord being done. He didn't see that. He seen death. So he came in and he gave it life, and which when he gave it life, it strangled it out because of what it did. That you need to see what the curse of the fig tree is, in my explanation for that. That's why it is the way it is with that. That's why the tree is not Asia. It's not Israel, or it's not any other thing. It's pertaining to the life of the church that he came upon on that point in time. So to wrap this up and to close this up, he's pissed off. He's mad. He went to bed sleeping and thinking of what he did that day. He kicked the tables over. He did what he did, and he's hungry for earning. And he says to them the story of the people that's in the vineyard. And he says unto them, he says, have you never read the scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And the Lord has done this and is marvelous in our eyes. Why? And I give you my questions, which the pinnacle of my entire situation is this. He says, they know and they think that he will bring them riches to the wretched end. He replied, and he will rent the vineyard to other tenants who will give him his share of the crop of the harvest. But he says, haven't you ever read the scriptures? No. Because the stone which the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this and is marvelous in their eyes. This all goes back to the fig tree. And this all goes back to Hosanna, Hosanna. Blessed he that comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest of heaven. It all comes back to the fact that, haven't you heard the lips of the children and the infants? O you Lord, you called forth your praise. You see, the people gave Jesus the backing. The stone is Jesus that the builders, which is them, rejected, and has become the cornerstone. Okay, that is the moral of this this 3-part saga is that. But I want to say that there's more to it than that. That you get the biblical sense of it, but what and why do you not get the other portion of it? You see, in fairness, it comes back to Luke. You see, the one landowner didn't care for his land. He had people do it for him. And yet you have the other son who's out there in the trenches doing things. And he says, I worked for you and did all this for you. How is this better? He says, I paid the way to do the work of the land. I did everything for you. I didn't get a fattened calf. I got killed. My other brother goes out and does all kind of fornication with harlots and other things like that. Doesn't do any of the work that I did and gets the reward. How does that work? It's a greater sense of a greater being, of a better story, a better understanding later down the line, which when I close that up, you'll understand that and you might see where it's going. But Jesus was literally in Matthew 20:21. He was mad. He was mad. And he says, he let them speak. And he's like, you heard the story before. He says, well, they're going to bring it in to the people that did it. And so he said, you never read the scriptures. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. So you see the son's side. He says, I give you my son's side. I give you my brother's side. I give you my brother's side. My brother's side is that he had people do the work for him. He had the money to have people do the stuff for him. And, the brother got to do the fornication with the harlots. And he was the landowner. And he had everybody do everything for him, for his fruits for him. And he says, I'm the brother that's doing the pathway right, that's supposed to get the inheritance for it. And he says, I'm the one getting killed for it. You see, I gave to you the Alpha and Omega section that says that Alpha is the base and the inverted V, or the V, is the headstone of the other. Okay, where you get this is that the stone that the builders rejected become the cornerstone. Let's break down the line by line to get better understanding of this and see the two sides in which the two brothers might see this. He says there was a landowner that planted a vineyard. I really don't even like this one here. I like Luke's because it's a little more simpler. He planted a vineyard and he rented it to some farmers and went away for a long time. He planted the vineyard, he rented it to some farmers and went away for a long time. At harvest time, he sent forth the tenants so that they could give him some fruit of the vineyard. The tenants are occupying the vineyard, that in which they rented, that they own, that they make, and they're there for a long time. He went away for a long time. So the farmers are there working all the time, and they paid their way for that. So rightfully, why is it wrong for them not to have ownership of that? You see, the harvest time came, and they're like, we did all the work, and we did everything right. We created the harvest. We created the fruit. We made the fruit, and it came out and did what it was supposed to do. That was the harvest time. And at that time, they sent a servant to take what was theirs that they created and done right. So, why, if these people did what was right to further the lesson, at harvest time they sent a servant to the tenants so that they could give him some fruit of the vineyard? Okay, they question why they need to give any of the fruit to him. Why are you giving? Why are you giving the land back to the other brother? Why are you giving him a fatted calf? Why are you giving the fruits to the labors of the cow that I raised and fed every day? I fed that cow every day. I watered that cow every day. I did everything for that cow. The cow's on my land. I maintain the fence to keep the cow inside the land. And I give the cow everything that the cow needs. I took care of the land that labors the field. I grew the corn up and prayed to God that the rain came down onto the land and produced fruit. I maintained and did not only what was needed of the fruit, but as any land is, such as mowing the grass, you gotta de-weed that stuff. You gotta prune it. You gotta take out the old. You gotta take out the bad. You gotta clip the little trimmings of the everything else. And then you're gonna send someone that is of your calling and send somebody and take that from us. And he says, but the tenants beat him and beat him and sent away the first tenant. They're like, no, not going to happen. And he sent another servant. And that one was beaten and treated shamefully and sent away empty handed. They're like, no, it's not going to happen. And what was the reason why? And you're like, well, the first one came, the second one came, wanted the fruit, and the third one came, wanted the fruit. So there's two things that they either wanted. They either wanted the fruit, or they wanted to continue to keep doing what they was doing, knowing how what they was doing, which they was right in their way. They was making the fruit the way it needed to be done. They was doing everything that the company needed to be done. Then, you know, who says that the man that planted the vineyard is the God Almighty, and that He owns it, and that the last guy that that they'll send is the Son in whom I love, and perhaps they will respect Him. We can see that dying on the cross and Jesus Christ and all the thing, we can make that connection. But why do we make that connection and always have to assume that it is that way in which the way it is? And he said, they shall see. They said, then they send a third, and they wound and kill him. And then he sent his son. And he says, that's as good a place as me. He says, if they respect me, they'll respect my son. They'll respect my son. They'll give them what they need, and they'll be done. They didn't do that. But yet what they say is, I ask, why did they do it? And they say, why did they do it? Well, they say, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. They're like, we worked the land, we did the tilling, we did everything for it. And rightfully, in fairness, think of and who should actually have it. If it was being done right, and it was being done right, then why is the man that planted the vineyard and the heir the right to the inheritance based upon principle that is because they are what they are? I'm gonna say that again because I go a little bit quick, and this story is so long. The question is, the question is why is the man that planted the vineyard, the Lord or whatever, and why is it that Jesus Christ, the Son of the inheritance, and the killing of him by gaining the inheritance, why is it that the man that planted the vineyard and the son that dies for the vineyard make any connection to, and why that the people that was already in place of doing what was right for the vineyard, where does it give them the right to do the left or the right? If you're on the left here, you're saying they have no right to kill Jesus and take care of the vineyard. But yet, the vineyard is more so theirs for the taking than the man that's planted it and walked away and didn't care about it. The man that planted it and rented it to some farmers and went away for a long time is not a man that cares for ownership of the vineyard. See, his only interest is what is in and coming from the vineyard. He didn't care for the people that was inside the vineyard. You see, the story gets changed a lot more than just what's on the top that everybody will tell you about. It's not the simplest explanation. The simplest explanation is we don't link the man that planted the vineyard to being Jesus because Jesus owns everything. It's the kingdom of heaven. And when he sends his only son, the inheritance of ours, that when we kill him, which that's what we want to do, we want to arrest and kill him, then God forbid when the people hear this, then they directly think they spoke some parable against him. And at that point in time, Jesus is like, what's the meaning of this? What don't you get? The stone that the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. Who now is the builder? The vineyard person that planted the vineyard planted the vineyard. He didn't care for it enough for himself. He rejected it. He said, let somebody else take care of it. And when he said, I'll let someone else take care of it, and they did all the work in the field, they pruned all the trees, they made it look pretty, and they took care of it and maintained it, he's like, I want a reward for that. Because he didn't do nothing. And he's supposed to be feared and rejected. He's supposed to be feared and accepted. And so which that land and that which is done right, that the people are taking care of and producing, they produced the fruit. They did everything right. They did nothing right except for wait for somebody to take what they did for what their cause is. You see, we're not saying here in this case is that it's not a fig tree. It's not something that's dead. It's not something that's got leaves on it. It's not producing it. It's doing what is right. Okay? Where do we get the fig tree? What happened in the fig tree situation? The fig tree has leaves on it. And the problem is everybody took from the fruit of it. You see, Jesus was walking down a path. Jesus was walking down a path, and one of two things was there. You either say that, between the two cities and the 2 points, the temple and Bethlehem, wherever he's walking to, you can look it up, you scholars, I don't care. Think of it your way as you are. He's walking from one point to another. Guess what? When you get out of your house and you don't have nothing to eat, and you need to drive to work, and work is 20 or 30 or 40 miles away. It's more than a 5-minute drive. It's an hour, 2 hours away. In their time, they had to walk a couple miles away. So, Jesus, in his divine nature, puts little trees out there along the way. And if at any time, even if this tree was in city or was in season, or it was not in season, but he came to McDonald's and says, McDonald's is open. I'm going to go to McDonald's and I'm going to get some food. And when I walk into McDonald's and I expect to get food and there ain't nobody there, the place is empty, but the building's there and it's open. I'm waiting. I'm hungry. In a sense, it is that way, and it is not that way. He expects to see some type of fruit. And in the inverse of this, he's saying, I see the functionality of what, Ben McDonald, he goes and builds the building. He planted the vineyard. And then he says to his son, hey, son, you go over there to that vineyard and you go and get the food out of it. What's going to happen to the workers that's inside that building? In modern day times, I build a building, I create it to work, and it functions properly. You think of McDonald's, you think of Walmart, you think of Sam Walton. Sam Walton does not send his kids into another Walmart with a shopping cart that's empty. That says, when Black Friday comes and it's our season to harvest, he doesn't send his kids into that location and tell them to go get a shopping cart full of stuff and to ask them to walk out and expect it to be given to them. It's not the case. Because those people that are inside of that Sam Walmart, those people that are working for it, those people that are taking care of those fruits that's inside of it, are the ones that are doing what is right. And so, you smiting the fact that says this. Sam Walton's son walks into Walmart with a shopping cart full of everything. Walks out with them little flat carts with $50,000 of TVs. The Samsung 80-inch TVs, 4K, high definition. Oh yeah, gets 4 or 5 of those, puts them on the pallet, walks out of Sam's Club with it, and he says, I want some of that product that's down there. I'll send my son down there. They ain't going to harm him. He's going to walk in, take what's his, walk out. Nobody's going to say nothing. But yet, the security guards that are on the gates of that particular building, they understand that he could be or not be, could be the one that owns that land. So guess what? In their time, maybe that was a little wrong. They didn't go through trial and jury like we did. They said, well, you know what? Guess what? We're the one renting land here. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. Let's just kill this guy. He won't be over it anymore. And we'll own it. So, where do you come with the story now? You see, the stone that the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. The power everybody looks to is the cornerstone. What is the peak pinnacle of it? The peak and pinnacle of it is the vineyard. The vineyard is the focus. Not that the builders rejected the son. It's not that is what it is. But it's the fact that the store that's got the fruit into it, the store that's got the product into it, the merchandise, is what is the focus. And you can't explain it any other way and think any differently. There doesn't have to be respect toward the son in the case in which they kill him, because in their right, they're the brother that's doing what's right in the overall picture. It's like, I'm the one working in the fields. How's that right? And they get pissed, and they get pissed and kill the other brother. Why not? It's wrong that way, but that's the way it is. That's the way they proceed to think that something's going to happen. So why, when we look at it, is this. He's over here in Matthew, and he's pissed off. I don't see anger, and too much anger. Maybe I'm not reading too much of the story here. Mark 12, Mark 20. But there's some events that says Jesus is a little mad at this whole point in time. He just strangled a tree, took the life of it, and killed it. He just came into this church that was supposed to be functioning properly in their eyes. He walked in, gave it life, but yet in the same time strangled it and took it away. And he's just walking a little ways further, and then they're like, well, what authority you got to do this? And he's like, well, hey, it goes down like this. He's like, those are the people there, and the son expected this, and this is this. There's always two sides of an equal balance of the story. The whole thing is that the Lord has done this. It's that way for the way it is. But why? If I don't want to stretch this out any longer because it's just so dull, it seems to be repeating the same story and the same story and the same story. But there's more to it, always, that you can build along the way. Whoso would you rather be? Would you rather be the landowner, which you all assume is the Lord? Would you rather be the son that's respected that goes in and gets killed? Or would you rather be the ones working and producing fruits and doing the labors and making a perfectly functioning society the way it's supposed to be? Because to me, the thief would come in the night and steal from the place. And to me, that's what happened. They sent the son for a purpose of work that he didn't do to earn. And that's why they say, well, he'll bring an end to these riches. He'll bring an end to these wretched end. It says, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end. They replied, and he will rent the vineyard to other tenants who will give him his share of the crop at harvest time. And like I said, he was pissed, and he says, have you never read the scriptures? If it was right, why? If it was right, if they nailed it, and which, like I said, they heard the story in Mark, they heard the story in Luke, and they heard the story in Matthew right now. It's been told to them over and over and over and over. And they're like, we heard the story, Jesus. You're going to kill us, and you're going to take us away, and that's it. Then why? You see, it is them that always wants to take the action. It is always them, the teachers of the law and the chief priest, looking for a way to arrest him immediately. To do what's immediately. Because they spoke a parable against him. It's always them looking to do something to him. Whoso is like that in the story? Let's go back. The man planted a vineyard. Well, who's the man? Well, the man planted the vineyard. That's the Lord. The Lord sends his son, and they kill the son, right? That's how it's told. Seems to me that these are the teachers of the priest. They're always looking for a way to take the fruit. Why so then does he ask and say, have you never read, when he says they'll bring the wretches to the end and they'll kill them and bring in new tenants and share the crop with the harvest of others? Jesus says, why didn't Jesus say at that point in time, I can either say neither confirm or deny? He says he's not agreeing with them. At this point in time, he's not agreeing with them. He says, have you never read the scriptures? You're telling me that I'm Jesus and I'm going to go kill everybody that's in the vineyard. So now, when you look at it is, let's think of it this way. Is it Jesus? Jesus is the landowner, and, the landowner planted the vineyard, and he specifically designed it by putting a wall around it and dug a wine press into it and built the watchtower, and he made sure that people could protect it, and then he gave it to others. Jesus didn't do any of these things, so therefore, why did the Lord distribute the property? Why did the Lord do that? The Lord didn't do those things either. So you're saying it's them people, and he says, well, then therefore, if it's not them people, then it must be us that you're talking about. He says, so therefore, you'll bring it into these riches, you'll kill us, and then you're going to find other people to do it for you, and then those people are going to give you what you want. And that's not right, because how so is this over here? What's the story of the son? Over here in the story of the son, he says that, you know, you worked, the older brother become angry and refused to go on. So his father went out and pleaded with him. He says, I need to make it right with you. I don't need to make it right with you. But he answered his father, says, look at all of the years that I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. These people worked in the farms and the factories and everything else. And he says, I did what was right for you. And he says, what did you give me? He says, you never gave me even a young goat to eat, to have, that will say was my own, to celebrate to my friends for all the work that I've done. You didn't come home on Friday night. You didn't come home on the weekends. You didn't come home on any things like that. We didn't have fatted calves and steaks. He says, but this other son of yours squandered the property with prostitutes and comes, and you give them the fatted calf for him. He says, my son, the father says, you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But he had to contribute to and be glad because the brother of yours was dead and alive again. He was lost and is found. You see here, people, the father said, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. You own the church. You own the preaching. Why so therefore would Jesus want to come back and take it all away from you and give it to people to produce food. Because, see, that doesn't make sense. It says, therefore, I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to people who will produce fruit. Everyone who falls on the stone will be broken in pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. Well, hold a second here. These people were producing food. These people were producing the produce of fruit. They produced it. They just didn't give it up yet. And where so does that lead this last problem with this last section? I don't think I've gone over this. So, you see here, the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day he sent them into the vineyard. He said, about 9 in the morning, he went out and saw workers standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, you also go and work in my vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right. So they went. So, must have been somewhere on the lines of, I'll pay you whatever is right. Let's all assume that it's going to be $1. You're going to do this for $1. He went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. And about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he went out and still found some more others standing around. He asked them, why have you been standing here all day doing nothing? You're not producing fruits. You're not producing labors. I want you to go out and produce the fruit, and I want you to go out and produce work. And he says, because no one had hired us. They answered, there's no jobs. There's no jobs. We're poor. There's no jobs. We want to work. Hey, Mr. President, we live in a poverty-stricken area. We want to have jobs. We need to have work. There's no work. He says, because no one has hired us. We don't do anything because no one hires us. He said to them, he says, you also go and work in my vineyard. You go out and you get position. He says, when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said unto his foreman, he says, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going to the first. Sounds a little strange. I walk in at 5 o'clock, I check out at 5:30, and I get my day's wage. I'm the first one in, the first one out. The last one in is the last one out. The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon come and each received a denarius. So when those came out who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius, $1 in terms. And when they received it, they began to grumble because the landowner began to grumble against the landowner. Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you made them equal to us who have been the burden of the work and the heat of all day. They came when it was cool. We came in the morning when it was cool. We worked all the way through the heat into the cool, and these people came in the cool, when in which it was cool, and you're still giving them the rewards in which to reap. Because of that, we're giving you the $1. But he answered one of them, I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Says, don't you agree to work for a denarius? He says, you knew what the work was. He says, you knew how much he's getting paid. In your eyes, you thought that it was worthy of what it was. At the time in which you did what you did and you thought it was fair at the time. You worked your day, and now you're seeing others work for less and reaping the reward for what you see, in which you get less from it, but yet they get everything. Take your pay and go. Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. I want to treat you all equal. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or have you envious or are you envious because I am generous? Strangely, that builds another segment of confusion because it says, so as the last will be first, and the first will be last. Strangely, so the last will be first, and the first will be last. I kind of coined that the same as saying the builders build and rejected, and what they rejected become what they built. So the last will be first, and the first will be last. The stone that the builders rejected, the last thing that they'd ever take, had now become the first thing that they'd ever desired. You see here, Jesus is pissed. He's mad at Matthew. He's like, don't you get it? Says if you never read or read the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. And the Lord has done this as marvelous in your eyes. The last will be the first, and the first will be the last. They went out and said that this great vineyard, the man planted the vineyard, and ran into some farmers that went away for a long time. The harvest was sent, and the servant of the tenants, and the first thing he sent, the farmers, the man that planted the vineyard says this: when the first harvest comes, I'm going to get my first harvest. I'm first. He goes and sends his people. I am first. I am first. I am first. Give me what is mine now. I am first. Let me take what is mine. I'll coerce them to do what I want in fear. I'll send someone in my representation. I'll send one like myself. Because I am first. But yet, when that was which is built, the people that are the farmers, that which is last, which they rejected, that which is last, in which the vineyard producer took these people and said, I am first over you. I take first crop of the season, and you get what's left. That's all that matters. The stone that the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. It now has more power over them than what you think. So the last will be the first, and the first will be the last. Here, the person that planted the vineyard always wants to be first. The person that plants the vineyard wants to be first. And so the last will be the first, God said. He says, why do you expect it first to get the first fruits of the labor? And so therefore the last will be the first. He says, the vineyard people, the people that are working in the vineyard, that are doing what's right, the people that are working in Sam Walmart that are doing what's right, the people that are doing what's in society that's doing what's right, people that are doing what's in the church is doing what's right, they're going to be first. I'll pay them my wages first, and the first will be the last, and they'll get equal pay. Why didn't the owner of a lanyard not say that I'm supposed to be first and I want it now? Why didn't the owner of the lanyard say, you have some first and you leave what's left over for me and I'll have what's left? You see, this is a fully functioning vineyard. It has the landowner who planted the vineyard, who put a wall to protect the vineyard. He dug a wine press in it and he built a watchtower. In the King James Version, you might see it say it's not really a watchtower, but he built a hedge around it. He says a certain man planted a vineyard in the New King James Version. It says a certain man planted a vineyard. He sent a hedge about it. He dug a place for the wine fat, and he built a tower. And he lent it out to the husbandman, and he went to a far country. He let others take care of what was supposed to be done. He built him a place. He gave him what it was, and he dug a place for that stuff to go when it went. So when the people did what was expected of them, why does this? It was at the season. He sent his husband and servant. He sent a servant that he might receive fruit of the vineyard. And they caught him and they beat him. They killed him, sent him away. Where do you not get why these people weren't right in what they did? So why do you destroy them? You see, everyone makes the simplest, easiest assumption to everything at any time based upon any type of other assumption on what any other scholar says. But what does the books say? What does the books say? Leave it only to the books. Don't leave it to what you have, what others tell you. Because this side note says this, or some scholarly person studied that, and they tell you this. Leave it to what it says. Leave it to where it says this. Compare what the theme of what the story is. He says, son, he says, look at all these years I've been slaving for you. And he says, the son says to the father, he says, look at all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate to celebrate with my friends. He says, but the son of yours who squandered your property and prostitutes come home and you killed a fatted calf for him. You're supposed to put honor into him because of what he did. And the father says, you're always with me and everything is yours. Why so then is the question of why they're so worried about being wiped out. Why are they so worried about being wiped out? They're producing fruit. Why does the owner have to have that fruit? There's other vineyards out there. There's other things and other places for other people to do things. Why does he need to have it from his own vineyard? Why then does he feel he needs to wipe out these people? Because if he wipes out these people and then thinks he's going to find someone to rent the other vineyard from other tenants and he will give him his share of the crop and the harvest at that point in time, What's to say that he's not going to wipe out other vineyards? What authority does he have over those other vineyards? And to which one that he owns of this vineyard? And that's why Jesus is like, you don't get it. He says unto them, you've never read the scriptures. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and is marvelous in our eyes. That which is of the attention is the vineyard. And the Lord does this because this is marvelous in our eyes. Right? The stone which the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. The Lord had done this, and it had become marvelous in our eyes. He's saying, meet me halfway. He says, don't you see? He's coming to him saying, I'm the Messiah. He says, meet me halfway. He says, don't you understand that if I'm the Messiah and you're the church, you're supposed to be building a relationship with me so we can make of what we need to do to make things better. He says, the Lord has made the vineyard the thing of importance. Not so much the workers, not so much the what it is, but there's a process to what it's doing. And it is functioning beautifully. It's creating the food. It's creating the harvest. It's in the right season. The things are perfect. He says the workers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. He's not accusing the workers of doing wrong. He's not saying you're wrong. He's not saying I'm going to smite you because you're wrong. He's not saying that I'm going to kill you. And that's where he gets mad. He's like, how many times do I got to tell you? You think that he's going to bring the riches to the end. And he replied, and you will rent the vineyard to other tenants, and it will give them their share of the harvest. It's not the harvest that is the problem. It's not the beauty of who owns the land and who's going to get it. The beauty is of what it is of the vineyard, of what it produces, and that's the fruit in what it does. He says, I want that of what it is that you see. I want you to say that the vineyard is the most important thing. And to see and say that we're both working for a common goal. Because God has done this. God has put the focus on the vineyard, and that's what's important. And that we both have the same understanding that is marvelous in our eyes. It's in our eyes. We both see the same thing. We both see the same beauty. You all go to the Grand Canyon. You all go to the edges of the ocean and stand in the water with your feet standing down on the ground. And you look out above it. You go and scale the highest mountaintops to say you do what no one else has done. And you look down at all the beauty, which the snow lays and everything else, and which it is. It is what it is, in which we both accept the beauty of the nature of what it is and why it is. He says, but you can't come to the terms and understand that we both see and we both have the same understanding of what the same thing is. And that's the point where the split is. That's where you get divorce. That's where you get separation. That's where you get separation from the good. That's where you get separation from the bad. That's where you get when Adam and Eve come together. They had their relation. They fell by disobedience to God and how they did what they did. And they separated. They didn't go and say, look at this tree. Let's all in the beauty and the knowledge of it. But they say, why can't you revert back to say where it is with? Why can't you go back and revert to saying where it is with what it is?